indulge me for a moment, but I got this song stuck in my head. And it goes, follow me, everything is all right. I'll be the one to tuck you in at night. And if you want to leave, I can guarantee you won't find nobody else like me. Now, do those words sound familiar to anybody? Got somebody, yay. Well, for someone like me, who listened to a lot of the hit songs of the 90s, I recognize that as a song by a guy named Uncle Kracker was his name. And the song is simply called Follow Me. Now, this song may not have had any Christian intentions at all when he wrote it, as it talked about the relationship between a guy and a girl. But if you think of the lines a little bit more carefully, it could fit. See, let's start with that first line. Follow me, everything is all right. See, if we put that into a Christian context, we can realize that it is fitting and true that if we follow Jesus, everything will be all right. For Jesus is who we are to follow as He is leading us as God would like us to be led. When we follow Jesus, we are following the teachings of God, and we are living our lives as God would like us to live them. See, it is when we are following Jesus that we begin to see the way of truth and light. As we read in the story that Isaiah tells us, when he says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. See, when those of us who walk in darkness open our eyes to the light and we follow the teachings of God, we will be taken out of that darkness, and everything will be all right. So then let's look at that next line where it says, I'll be the one to tuck you in at night. Now, when I look at this line in the context of Christianity, I think of comfort and safety. See, I recall when I was a child, my dad would come and tuck me in at night. And I always felt really safe and protected knowing that my dad made sure that I was okay before I went to bed. And it was so wonderful. He would even give us a special blessing at night that I've now passed on to my kids. And it was that protection feeling. Think of what the psalmist says in the opening of this lesson when it says, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Should I fear anyone? The Lord is my fortress, protecting my life. Should I be frightened of anything? If you follow Jesus and His teachings, then you will be fully protected and have nothing to fear. You can feel as safe as that child being tucked in by a parent. We can likewise look at our faith as what safely tucks us in at night. And we can lay our heads down knowing full well that we are doing what is right and acceptable to God. Then we get to that other line, the line that's been the hardest for me when I think of it in a Christian context, and it says, if you want to leave. It's hard to think of that, and the idea that God would be fine or allow people to turn from Him. It doesn't make Him happy. However, we see these posts all the time on the internet. People turning from God and trying to get others to turn from God and proving that God doesn't exist or whatever the case may be. And those posts on Facebook, when I see it, it just breaks my heart. And the sad fact is, this does happen all the time. And God allows it. And the only reason He allows it is because He does not want to force anyone. See, God gave us all this amazing gift called free will. And He gives it to us because God wants us to have that choice to follow Him or not to follow Him, because He wants us to love Him because we want to love Him, not because we have to love Him. Thus comes back to that line, if you want to leave, then go and live your life away without Christ. But always know that for those people, God does welcome His lost back to the fold, just as that father in the story of the prodigal son. And then we come to that final line, which is, I think, is great when it follows what we just spoke about, but where he says, I can guarantee you won't find nobody else like me. See, looking at this through that lens of a Christian believer, it is so true. We will never find anything or anyone as amazing as Jesus and God. See, we were created with this hole in our hearts. And this hole needs to be filled. And it was designed to only be filled by God. Now, we hear our psalmist say, come, my heart says, seek God's face. Lord, I do seek your face. We need to seek His face and fill that hole with the love of God. We do have to be careful, though, because if we don't pay attention, we can fill it with the wrong things. I recently read a book for one of my classes called You Are What You Love by James Smith. And he talks in this book about how we were designed to fill our hearts with this love for Jesus and for God. And he warns that if we are not consciously paying attention, it is easy for us to turn our hearts to rival gods and rival kingdoms, which in turn will take us further and further from following Jesus and the words of God. So here's this song, which was a popular song in the 90s, talking about a relationship between a man and a woman that can also fit into that context of our relationship between us and God. And we can look through these lines and see how it can fit into following Jesus. However, we also need to look past those lines. And we got to look at our current culture. We are living in a world where it is so easy to follow someone or something. I can't help but think about all the stuff we follow on Facebook. And how easy it is to click on that button. And then we can see what is going on in the lives of whoever it is that we're choosing to follow. It has been made so easy in our world today that we don't even have to leave our homes. We don't have to get away from our computers or even pick up a phone to call somebody to see how they're doing. I remember at a time when I was just a tad bit younger, and if you wanted to follow celebrities, or in my case, country music singers, I had to either join their fan club, go to my newsstand and get the current country magazine, or I had to wait until their newest updates were broadcast on whatever country show I was watching. It actually took more work to follow things back then than it takes today. We can get all the news we desire with the click of a button or the swipe of a finger. So to think of what it meant to follow Jesus and be a follower of Him, and the work that it took for people back then to stay in touch. I mean, back then you either needed to physically follow Him, as His 12 apostles did, or you had to wait for the latest updates to get to your village, which could take quite a while. So nothing was easy or instantaneous for followers of Jesus back in biblical times as it is in our world today. And so it was either really difficult, or Jesus was just that convincing that he was able to get these men that we read about in our gospel lesson to stop what they're doing, stop fishing, and leave their nets behind to follow him. As we read in that gospel lesson today, when Jesus saw Simon, who became Peter, and his brother Andrew, and he says, "Come, follow me, and I'll show you how to fish for people." Right away, they left their nets and they followed him. They threw their nets aside to follow Jesus. Now, mind you, they were not privy to the same kind of knowledge we have today. So for them, this meant something. Yet we still have people today in our world that do not want to follow Jesus. What was it that made them follow Jesus based only on the knowledge that they had in their time? And it didn't stop there either. As the gospel lesson continued on to tell us about Jesus seeing two more brothers, James and John, in which we are told they were in the boat with Zebedee, their father, repairing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father behind, just to follow him. These four men were willing to drop everything that they were doing, their livelihood, their way of making money, to follow this man who they knew very little about at that time. So why do people today find it so hard to drop what they're doing to follow Jesus and these teachings of God? Now, I'm not trying to tell people to physically drop what you're doing or to completely give up your means of making money to follow Jesus. But I'm speaking of the sinful things that we do in our lives today that we could let go of in order to properly follow Jesus. See, it does not mean that all things that we're doing need to be stopped. But there are things in our lives that we do in excess. For example, it's not bad or sinful to have a drink. For those people that go out with the idea of getting trashed, that's when it becomes a sinful desire. So the problem is that to give up these sinful things can be harder for some of us than others. And quite honestly, sometimes it's just easier to just give in to our sinful nature and our sinful desires than it is to stay strong and do what the Lord expects from us. Another book I've read is called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years by a guy named Donald Miller. And it's my favorite line from this book. This book talks about the stories that we're living out in our lives. And he was writing a movie about his life. And he made this comment, and it just sticks in my head, that people love to have lived a great story, but few people want to do the work that it takes to make it happen. See, we don't like to do things that can take work or be difficult to do, as many of us would prefer to take that easier road in life. And at the same time, taking the easy way in life is not as rewarding as the longer path of struggle and difficulties that we work through to get to our end goal. And thinking of that, I remember when I was in my August intensive, a teacher of ours had us go to Sinsinawa Mound. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's a nun's place. It's great. They have Sinsinawa cinnamon bread that the nuns make. It's really great. But when we're there, we went into this room. It was really big, and the lights were dimmed, and it was very quiet. And in this room was this floor mat, and they called it a labyrinth. Now, it's really cool with this labyrinth because it had all these twists and turns in it, and it's not where you would typically expect the twists and turns to be in a circle. But the idea is that you start on the edge, and you take your twists and turns all the way to the center, and then you come back out, and you're supposed to be praying as you're walking the labyrinth. It's a wonderful experience. And I loved it because some of these turns were very close together. You take 2 steps and you have to turn again. But then there were others where the length that you walked was long enough that you would have someone walking right beside you, even though they were on a different part of the path. Now, as I'm sitting here looking at this, I'm like, well, I can either take my time and go all the way through it and get to the center and go all the way through it and come back, or I can just walk straight to the center, say a few prayers, and walk back. But that would not have been as rewarding as going through and walking through all the twists and turns and thinking and comparing that to the lives we live. Skipping all the difficult work is not as rewarding as making it through it all. Being willing to walk that entire circle with all those twists and turns, I was able to enjoy this feeling of pride and accomplishment that I did it. And I think of that in context of what it takes to follow Jesus. That we're going to have our twists and turns, we're going to have our difficult moments, but it's always worth it in the end to know that we made it through. I like to always say, it's not always the difficult times that make us who we are, it's how we end up on the other end that shows our character. So, it is important to be willing to do the work that it takes to follow Jesus, which means making changes in our lives and doing things differently than we may have always enjoyed doing them. So my question to all of you this morning is, are you willing to make changes and put in the work that it's going to take for you to follow Jesus if you have not already been doing great work? Are you willing to quite simply just follow Jesus? Love and peace to you all.